The silence of the void was not empty. It was waiting. For 10,000 solar cycles, the Aethelgardian Hegemony had drifted through the spiral arms of the galaxy like a golden glacier, slow, inevitable, and crushing. They were the architects of order, the purifiers of chaos. To them, a civilization was a variable in a grand equation, and if the variable did not fit, it was removed. When the hegemony's sensors first tasted the radio waves emanating from the third rock of a yellow dwarf star in the Orion Spur, they registered nothing more than a minor anomaly. A primitive noise. A species screaming into the dark, begging to be noticed. The High Archon, Xylith, sat upon his command throne aboard the dreadnought Stellar Silence. The ship was a masterpiece of psionic engineering and heavy matter, a moon-sized teardrop of white ceramic and pulsing blue veins that defied gravity through sheer arrogance. Xylith viewed the holographic representation of Earth with all the interest of a gardener spotting a weed. The inhabitants were biological, carbon-based, short-lived, and fractured. They warred over resources that the hegemony could synthesize from dust. They worshipped deities that had never answered them. They were, by every metric of the Galactic Council, insignificant. The standard protocol was initiated. It was not a declaration of war, for one does not declare war on insects. It was a notice of compliance. A simple transmission, broadcast on every frequency, in every language the hegemony's translation matrix could decode. It said simply, lay down your weapons, dissolve your governments, submit to the order and you will be preserved, resist and you will be erased. The Archon expected the usual response: terror, panic. Then the inevitable negotiation followed by capitulation. It had happened 1,000 times before with 1,000 other worlds. The hegemony did not hurry. They parked their fleet, 300 ships, each capable of glassing a continent, just beyond the orbit of the planet's single moon. They waited for the humans to calculate the odds, because that is what intelligent species do. They do the math. They look at the energy output of the invading fleet, compare it to their own, realize the ratio is 1,000,000,000 to 1, and they surrender to save their genetic future. It is logic, it is survival, but the humans did not do the math, or perhaps they did and they simply did not care. The response, when it came, was not a digital transmission. It was not a diplomat. It was a singular physical object. A small, unmanned probe launched from the surface. It accelerated toward the hegemony flagship, bypassing the standard hailing frequencies. Xylith watched it on the screen, amused. Did they send a tribute? A token of submission. The probe detonated 3,000 kilometers off the bow of the Stellar Silence. It was a nuclear device. Crude, dirty, fission-based. Against the hegemony's void shields, it was less than a firecracker against a mountain. The radiation washed over the hull and vanished. Xylith sighed. The sound was a wet, clicking noise from his throat. It was disappointing. Disappointing that he would have to expend ammunition on such a primitive species. He gave the order to burn the first city as a lesson. Just one. To show them the scale of their error. The particle lance fired. A beam of concentrated antiprotons pierced the atmosphere, turning the air into plasma. It struck a metropolis on the eastern seaboard of the largest continent. In seconds, millions of lives were converted into ash and shadow. The Archon waited for the cry of surrender. He waited for the weeping. But the silence from Earth changed. It didn't deepen. It vibrated. The radio waves stopped being chaotic. They synchronized. The planet went dark, not the darkness of fear, but the darkness of a predator closing its eyes to listen. What Xylith did not understand, what no species in the civilized galaxy understood, was that humanity does not operate on the logic of survival. We operate on the logic of spite. You do not burn a human city and expect submission. You burn a human city, and you unlock a genetic memory of 1,000 generations of ancestors who survived the ice, the tigers, and the plague by being too stubborn to die. The real war began 6 hours later, and it did not begin with ships. It began with the impossible. The humans fired everything, not just military silos. They retrofitted mining lasers. They strapped solid fuel boosters to waste containers filled with scrap metal. They launched kinetic kill vehicles that were nothing more than tungsten rods. It was a storm of debris, a wall of garbage and fire rising from the gravity well. To the sophisticated targeting computers of the hegemony, it was chaos. The systems tried to lock onto engines, but half the projectiles had no engines. They tried to jam guidance chips, but the weapons were analog. The sheer volume of kinetic impacts overwhelmed the point defense grids. A piece of jagged iron, traveling at Mach 20, does not care about your superior philosophy. It impacts. One of the hegemony frigates, the Light of Reason, took a hit to its propulsion drive. Not from a missile, but from a retrofitted communication satellite packed with high explosives. The ship listed, its containment field flickering. Then the humans did something that made Xylith's hearts pause. They launched their fleet, if one could call it that. It was a collection of ugly, blocky nightmares, ships built not for elegance but for brutality. They had no shields to speak of. Their hulls were thick slabs of armor plating. Their engines leaked radiation. They were flying coffins designed by madmen, and they were not firing energy beams. They were firing solid slugs, magnetic accelerator cannons, railguns. The hegemony shields were designed to disperse energy, lasers, plasma, particle beams. They were not designed to stop a 20-ton slug of depleted uranium moving at a fraction of the speed of light. The first slug punched through the Light of Reason like a needle through silk. The frigate crumpled, venting atmosphere and crew into the cold dark. On the bridge of the flagship, the tactical officers were in disarray. "This is illogical," one cried out. "Their casualty projected rates are 100%. Why are they attacking?" Xylith watched the tactical map. The human ships were dying in droves. For every hit they landed on the hegemony, they lost 10 vessels, but they kept coming. They were ramming the destroyers. They were detonating their own reactors when they got close enough to the hull. It was suicide. It was madness. It was glorious. The Battle of the Moon lasted for 3 days. The debris field became so thick that the sun was blotted out from the view of the flagship. Xylith had lost 40 ships. 40 ships of the line, lost to a species that hadn't even mastered faster-than-light travel. He was furious. He ordered the fleet to pull back to high orbit and prepare the planet Cracker. If they would not submit, they would be dust. But as the hegemony fleet retracted, the sensors picked up a new energy signature. It was coming from the far side of the moon, a hidden base. The humans had been busy. While their suicide fleet distracted the glorious armada, while their cities burned, they had been building something else. It was a cannon, but not a ship-mounted gun. It was a structure built into the lunar surface, a linear accelerator running the length of a crater chain. It drew power from a network of fusion reactors that were currently running at 300% capacity, melting into slag even as they charged the capacitors. Xylith realized too late what they were doing. They weren't targeting a ship. They were targeting the flagship's main reactor. The shot was silent in the void, but the impact rang through the entire fleet. The projectile was small, dense, and traveling at relativistic speeds. It bypassed the flagship's shields simply by moving too fast for the sensors to update. It struck the stellar silence amidships. The kinetic transfer was equivalent to a catastrophic meteor impact. The flagship broke. It didn't explode immediately, it shattered. The spine of the vessel snapped. Xylith was thrown from his throne, the golden armor scraping against the deck. The alarms were not wailing, they were screaming a flatline tone of total system failure. As the life support failed, Xylith looked out the viewport. He saw the earth below. It was scarred. It was bleeding. Massive hurricanes of smoke swirled in the atmosphere, but the lights were still on. And from the surface, thousands of tiny sparks were rising again. More ships, more missiles, more defiance, he understood then. The variable he had missed. The indomitable will. You can break their bones, you can burn their cities, you can shatter their sky, but you cannot break their mind. Because their mind is already broken in a way that makes them dangerous. They do not fight to live. They fight to ensure you die. The hegemony fleet, leaderless and terrified by the ferocity of the primitives, broke formation. They calculated the new odds, and for the first time in 10,000 years, the math told them to run. They engaged their warp drives, fleeing the system, leaving the wreckage of their pride floating in the orbit of a blue marble. On Earth, the survivors crawled out of the bunkers. They looked up at the sky, filled with the burning remains of gods. They did not cheer, they did not celebrate, they went to work. They pulled the alien technology from the crash sites, They studied the engines, they dissected the weapons, they learned. It took humanity 50 years to rebuild. It took them another 50 to master the technology left behind by the invaders. And it took them 100 years to build a new fleet. A fleet not of scavenged parts, but of sleek, predatory cruisers, painted in the matte black of deep space, bearing the insignia of a united Terra. They did not stay in the Orion Spur. They looked at the star charts recovered from the wreckage of the stellar silence. They found the coordinates of the Aethelgardian Hegemony, and they set a course. The galaxy had demanded their surrender. The galaxy had demanded their silence. Humanity answered, and the answer was a roar that would shake the pillars of heaven. When the human armada arrived in hegemony space, they did not send a transmission. They did not ask for surrender. They did not offer terms. They simply arrived, a cloud of darkness against the stars, and opened fire. The war that followed lasted a century. It was not a war of conquest. It was a war of extermination. The humans did not want the hegemony's worlds. They did not want their resources. They wanted their memory. They dismantled the empire system by system, star by star. The indomitable will of Earth became the nightmare of the galaxy. Other species watched in horror and awe. They learned the lesson that the hegemony had learned too late. You can challenge the Klingons, and they will fight you for honor. You can challenge the Vulcans, and they will debate you with logic. But do not challenge the humans. Do not back them into a corner. Do not threaten their home. For they are the children of a death world, born in blood and fire, and if you try to extinguish their light, they will burn the entire universe down just to see you turn to ash in the dark. The final log of the hegemony, recovered from the ruins of their capital world, contained only one warning for future civilizations. It was not a coordinate. It was not a weapon schematic. It was a simple phrase carved into the data slate by a dying hand: let them sleep. For if they wake, they do not stop. The story of Earth is not a story of survival. It is a story of the reversal. The day the prey became the predator. And now the galaxy is quiet, not the silence of waiting, but the silence of respect. The silence of fear, for the ships of Terra patrol the void and their message is clear. We are still here, and we are watching. The narration ends, but the echo remains. The screen fades to black, leaving only the cold realization that the greatest weapon in the universe is not a laser or a bomb or a ship. It is the refusal to yield. It is the human spirit. And it is terrifying,